Hello. I am waiting to be invited by Bio Higgins to be co-host on his live. I don't know if that's going to work. Oh, does it say DIY? Probably not DIY. What should we talk about? What should we say our topic is? Because I don't think politics is one of them. Should we say entertainment?
I just went with chatting because I don't know what we're gonna hit.
Okay. Chat. There we go. Chat.
Yeah. Because my
How are you
my
doing?
thinking,
How are you doing?
I'm surviving, man. Like it is what it is. Like uh, the Goblin logistics keep me pretty busy. She's yeah,
How old is she?
she's 2.5, and she's high tilt.
Yeah, I think that's the age where it's complicated because they can run around
Yeah,
and grab things, but they don't know what's safe yet.
she's pretty good that way. She's more like she's just a chaos goblin. Like she gets up like as soon as she wakes up, she's just going. Like she's just high energy. There's no naps. There's none of that. She just goes. Like it's hard to keep track of her, and like she's really good about like she doesn't do a lot of dangerous stuff. She doesn't really like put stuff in her mouth. She doesn't screw with electrical things or hot things or any of that. But she'll take stuff apart if you're not watching her. So like
So I
you'll go to
don't play Minion Rush. There's a comment asking us if we play Minion Rush. I don't even know what it is. Do you play Minion Rush? Do you know what it
no, never
is?
heard of it.
Sorry, Apple user something.
I'm thinking sus, but that's just me.
Yeah, I
I
agree.
Yeah. I'm wondering, like, because I never saw that comment, so I'm wondering if we have shared comments or individual. It'll be
Oh, you
interesting to
don't
find out.
see it? I don't know if we have shared comments or individual. It's I've seen it, so maybe we all have our individual comments.
Could be, could be. Oh, my main focus is talking to you, so we'll be
Yeah, no
good.
problem.
Yeah, like that was part of my thinking is I figured it'd be a good idea to get a chance to talk to you before like we throw you in the pool with me and Kate too.
Yeah, sure, no problem. I mean, it'd be nice to get to know you a bit more because I just watched your live,
Okay,
and it was really great. I had a really nice time with the both of you.
right on.
It was quite rambly, but that's fine. I was sewing next to it, so it took
Perfect.
me the chance to do some sewing because I mean it's the same when I watch TV and stuff.
Yeah,
I like to do something with my hands, otherwise I just kind of like grab my phone and like start
for sure.
mindlessly doing like scrolling on TikTok or doing something else, and then I don't watch the TV or like I don't
Yeah,
watch the show. Then, so I need to do something with my hands when I'm watching something. And
yeah.
also, I that sewing was long overdue. My basically, I have this teddy bear that I got when I was born from my godfather,
Okay,
and I sleep with it every night. And
nice.
it is I'm 27, so it is not new.
Yeah,
But I don't want to get rid of it because it's got this kind of personal connection. So I
for
was
sure.
kind of just stitching back some of the stuff that is getting torn as it ages. It's
Mhm.
got a few patches now.
Just adds character. It's great.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, trying to make something that's quite sturdy because obviously it needs to last quite a bit more if I want to keep it and keep sleeping on it
For sure.
for a few decades to come.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But that's the fun stuff, right? Like
Yeah,
that's part of why I like the restoration stuff so much is that you like the things that you own. If anything, take on more value that way. They develop their own history. They develop their own character. The battle scars don't detract from it, right?
yeah. I mean, I was saying if there was a fire, I would save my cat, and then I would save my teddy bear. That's probably the
Nice.
two things I want to get out of a fire.
Priorities
The
straight.
cat first, but then the
Yeah.
teddy bear.
Yeah. Assuming the cat doesn't figure out the fire first.
Yeah, assuming the cat doesn't. But like he likes to go outside. He's not allowed to, but he likes to sneak out anyway. So it's already hard to keep him inside. So I suppose that if there was a fire, he'd be more than happy to run outside.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a question I had for you. What part of England are you in? Like, I, as far as I know, you're originally from France, right? And then you moved over to Turf Island there for a little while. Like, what's the track there? I'm curious.
So I am from France. I'm from Brittany, so that's in the sticky bits in the
Yeah.
west of France. That's across from the English Channel.
Mm-hmm.
And I currently live in London. I did my master's in the UK,
Okay.
in Oxford.
Right on.
And then I started working in London. And so I've been in London ever since. So I've been in London for about 4 years now.
Okay, cool. What was the master's in?
Computer science.
Okay, right on.
What about you? What do you do for a living? What did
I
you
take care of the
study?
baby.
What do you... Sorry?
I take care of the baby.
Oh, it's your full-time job?
Oh yeah, she's plenty. I have some side projects with the leatherwork and the resto and stuff like that. I'm currently rebuilding my studio. Once that's done, then I can start expanding that a bit more. I wouldn't be surprised if I do more filming in there. Like my wife's also interested in getting on board with that, and we have a lot of projects in mind for sewing, for mending, for leatherwork. The list of projects is functionally infinite, but we'll see how that goes.
Yeah,
I'm curious because I never finished my degree. I dropped out because I ran out of money, and I live in Canada, so that matters. And most recently, I was in the military for about 4 years,
okay.
And I got bashed up pretty bad while I was there. So my back is pretty much shot right now. So I can't really do a lot of regular jobs anymore. So it lined up pretty well that my wife could get work back in Seychelles, which is where we are now. And then I take care of the baby. If anything, I'm better equipped for it than she is. So it's worked out pretty well that way. Because man, she did about a year while I was still in the Navy with the baby, and oh, it kicked her ass. It was rough. So this works better for us, and my hope down the road is to have that studio thing become full time, and then bring her in, and then hopefully make enough money that way that we don't need another job, because like I see little value in things like, because right now she works for a pretty big corporate tentacle monster kind of industry, and I'm not super interested
same.
in that.
I work for a big corporate tentacle monster. It's the same thing. It's a bank, so it's probably even worse. But I was also in the military for a while for weird reasons. So the university I went to in France is called École Polytechnique. I don't know if you heard of it.
For which?
École Polytechnique.
Yep.
So it's a military university, and so that's the university I was in, and so I was in the so it's military for weird historical reasons that I don't know if you want to go into details about, but basically Napoleon decided to make it military.
I'm a bit of a history dork, so it's all good.
Yeah, so it was created during the French Revolution, so during the Terror. It was not because all of the historical universities were royal universities, were under the king. So they created basically two other universities, École Normale and École Polytechnique, in Paris. And Napoleon in the 1800s decided to make École Polytechnique a military university that would be training the officers for his army, so the kind of infantry officers and the since then it's evolved to kind of do a lot of like weapons engineers come out of the École Polytechnique. But it's the courses that you get are not, so it's kind of like in general engineering and STEM. So it's not nowadays, because historically there's also been a lot of kind of high-ranking administratives coming out of École Polytechnique. So there are a few politicians, there's been a president, there's been kind of ministry people, things like that. But there's still quite a few spots for people in the administration to go after École Polytechnique after you graduate. But I decided I didn't want to do that. Ideally, I would like to do research in astrophysics. So I'm applying to start a master in astrophysics next year. So touch wood, I'm able to get in part-time because I still have to work, because otherwise I don't have money. But the good thing about École Polytechnique is that it's not the only école like that. It's not the only university like that in France, but you're paid while you're a student because you're in the military.
Right. Okay.
So so that was good for me because I come from a family that's like pretty middle class, like pretty middle class. Like just my mum's a teacher, my dad is a kind of computer technician.
Right. So nobody's got 20 grand to just funnel to you.
Yeah. Hi Jim. I just got a comment from Jim97, so just saying hi back.
Right on.
And so it was nice to have some money to what I was paid while I was doing my my uni years, and actually they also fund. So it's a weird thing, but basically you do 1 year in the military, then you do 2 years on campus,
Okay.
and then you do 1 year somewhere else, where you get a master from some other university. Historically, that was because Polytechnique was more kind of theoretical. You would go to another kind of engineer university in France to kind of have more hands-on kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But because we don't really do kind of mining engineers or bridge engineers and stuff like that anymore, it's not necessary so much to have kind of hands-on experience. So you just ask to do a master somewhere else. So it can be abroad as well. So that's why I decided to go abroad. But I was still paid while I was at Oxford. So that was nice as well. They didn't pay for the degree, but they paid me monthly.
Yeah, but that you can live on that, right?
Yeah, definitely. It was like 1,200 quid a month or something.
Nice. Okay, yeah, that's not a bad gig then.
No.
Did you have to do extended military service after that, or is it just that?
So I am on the reserve list. So yeah, I'm on the reserve list, so they can call me back, but I don't have to do military service. So basically, the 1 year that I did, the first year that I did in the military, that's kind of what you do. Otherwise, when you're on campus, you do kind of ceremonies and protecting the campus as well, because they've kind of amped up the terrorism threats.
Yeah.
So there is some kind of protecting the campus and things like that. But otherwise, no, you just in the reserve. That was kind of a bit of a weird thing, but they've reintroduced now that you need to work for the government in the 10 years after you graduate for a total of 10 years. But not my year. My partner, who did the same university, and she was 2 years after me, though. She has to work for the government. Otherwise, you have to pay the money that the school gave you.
So is she still in France then?
No, she's living with me, and she's not working for the. So she wants to do research in maths, and mathematics, but unfortunately didn't pan out to find a PhD that was funded, and she also doesn't have like 100K lying around,
just sitting around.
So she's also working for the finance industry right now and saving some to make herself fund a PhD.
But I mean, that's half the industry in London, right? So it makes sense.
Yeah, everybody's working in finance. I mean, not everybody, but like a lot of people. Yeah, a lot of the jobs are finance. Yeah.
Well, especially like comp sci and math,
that's the nice thing.
But with comp sci and math backgrounds, I'm sure they're hunting you guys.
Yeah, we get the finance industry in London. They really like people with French degrees because our maths are like kind of spot on for the finance industry.
That makes sense.
Because France is quite good at doing hardcore mathematics in school. So we have quite a few of the kind of top heads mathematicians. I don't know if you know about the Fields Medal, but that's kind of the equivalent of the Nobel Prize for mathematics.
Yeah.
So France and the US are equal for the number of Fields medals as at the top.
Yeah. Which tells you a lot, right? Like with a third
because the US is 5 times the number of inhabitants as France.
Yeah, like that right there. Like it's I've heard of the French schooling system's reputation that way. So like, yeah, it doesn't surprise me that it's a hot commodity in London.
Yeah, the finance industry, apparently that's with the, if you come out of one of those French schools that does kind of the grandes écoles is what they're called, they will pay you a lot to do finance in London.
Yeah. Well, and that's the other part, like if you're living in London, you kind of have to get paid a lot.
Yes. Yeah. But I'm trying to give back. I'm trying to do good things to kind of buy back my soul from working in the finance.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're not going in, like, because I imagine, I don't know the details of your job, but I imagine with the background, you're probably you're not signing loans off and shit like that, right? I would imagine you're doing more of the backroom theoretically stuff. So it feels a little less dirty that way.
Well, I'm kind of, basically what I'm doing is I'm doing the models for the traders is what I'm doing.
Okay.
So I'm doing the maths for the traders.
Right on. Well, I mean, more and more, it seems like that's the transition that's going on is like, how much trading is just done by computers at this point, right? Like it's how much do you need a physical guy to do anymore, right?
So the problem is that you still need a bit of physical guys to do stuff, for mostly for regulatory reasons.
Yeah.
So in hedge funds, very little. In banks,
Yeah,
more, because there are a lot more regulatory conditions on banks, particularly since 2008, basically.
Yeah,
And
thankfully.
so regulators want to be able to blame someone if something goes wrong, or
Yep.
if something illegal is done, or if you get too much risks that are taken, things like that. So regulators want to be able to blame someone, and
Yeah.
so that's why you kind of need an actual person. So if you do algorithmic trading, then if it's exclusively algorithmic trading, then the person that's going to be blamed is going to be the computer science person, the engineer that wrote the code.
Yeah.
And so usually there's at least some kind of risk people that are like supervising or regulating and things like that, because so typically the people who know the computer science don't necessarily know the finance, and vice versa.
Yeah.
They're kind of starting to be people who are good at both, because you kind of have more and more people who learned coding in school very early on, rather than doing a degree in computer science. So they learn coding in school and they do computer science and finance. But 20 years ago, that really didn't exist.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
it was the same thing when I was in school.
Yeah.
Yeah, because like when I was originally in University 4, I went into ethics, and then I started to transition into financial ethics. So I was looking, I was dabbling with economics as a double major kind of idea to get into financial ethics and get into the regulation side of things. And yeah, like the rate of crossover at the time was really low. Like that multidisciplinary approach just wasn't as common. And it seems like since then things have gotten a lot better that way. It's just that ethics usually isn't the stuff they're split with.
Yeah, but yeah, it's definitely starting to change a lot, and I see. I mean, I know my company's kind of doing a lot for algorithmic trading to have fewer traders, and a lot more computers doing stuff.
Yeah.
And another thing that's changing is with regards to cryptos as well. That's something that wasn't traded much a few years ago, and now they're starting to amp up the crypto trading. But yeah, because it's weird, because at the same time they're also pushing some sort of kind of green funds and things like that. So like they're trying to target everybody basically. So they have some green funds for the people who are trying to be ethical, but they also have some cryptos for people who like to burn the planet.
Yeah. Oh yeah, nature of the beast, right? Like my experience with finance guys is they aren't super worried about like, they don't really care who wants to buy their product, but they will make a product for whoever wants to buy one. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's also their policy is that if you want to be kind of one of the top banks in the world, you need to be able to trade anything. So no matter how weird the thing that your customer wants, no matter how exotic and how complex it is to price, you need to be able to price it. Yeah. And that's really what makes the difference between like the top 5 kind of American banks and like the rest of the banks, is that
who can
trade a lot of banks. Sometimes if you ask something that's too weird, they're going to be like, no, we don't know how to price that. That's just too complicated. We can't give you a price because we don't know. That's just too complex for us.
Well, and like derivative trading and stuff like that became so effectively arbitrary anyway. They got into a lot of trouble with that, so I get why they're a little more hesitant now.
Yeah, and but yeah, and what's ridiculous is that we have computers running daily risk overnight, to kind of have the risk of the positions that we have, so the risk that the bank is taking, and we need to give that to regulators. And I think 1% of the trades that we have take 99% of the time.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Because that's the 1% of super exotic stuff that's really complicated mathematically to calculate. And that takes all of the computing power.
That makes sense, right? Like, because a lot of the internal financial market stuff, like that's fairly easy to track. But if you're trying to do things like weird commodity-based ETFs and stuff like that, it's going to get screwy. If you're going to track like soy futures or something, like there's a lot of different steps in something like that. So that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly what, because I don't necessarily know the details of which instruments are taking a lot of time and stuff. I just I kind of saw a lot of kind of smaller snapshots of things because they're like, oh, we have this graph of calculations that's taking forever. Can you make it go faster? Was kind of stuff that I was dealing with. So I just kind of focus on little bits of codes inside of that because the people who know the finance are not necessarily very good coders. So then you kind of go in there and try to make it better.
So you're mostly coming in for like the optimization stuff.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
I mean, I changed teams recently to be a little bit more mathematical. So I'm doing a bit more mathematics and risk stuff now. So recently, because it was the end of the year, I've had to do a lot of kind of regulatory end of year stuff to be like, no, it looks like we haven't broken any rules and we are within the risk margins, and look at all those pretty graphs that show that we are within the risk margins. So that's what I've been doing for the past few months. But I changed teams in August to be a bit more on the kind of less coding and more maths kind of side of the modeling. But before that, I was very much kind of just working, like not really any idea of what was happening in terms of models, and just dealing with code and C++, and someone would kind of like dumb down the finance for me, and then I would try to write whatever they were dumbing down for me.
Okay, right on. So you're pretty comfortable with the math stuff too, then, eh?
Well, yeah, because the French system means you have to do a lot of maths for a long time.
Okay, yeah, because like over here, a lot of the comp sci, some people come to comp sci from philosophy, like through formal logic. Some people come to it through just hard math. Some people come to it just straight through computer science, just like from coding. So it just depends on what kind of background you get. Yeah, does your partner work for the same place or separate entity?
Separate entity, yeah. She works for a different company.
Not that lucky.
Yeah, no, she works. She doesn't work that far, but she doesn't work for the same company.
Okay, cool. But
we don't really. I mean, I've had people try to recruit me for her company, and I was like, no, I think that would be weird because her company is a lot smaller, and like I think it'd be weird if we're like both in the same office and.
It can get a little conflict of interest. Yeah.
Yeah, and like eventually we kind of end up stepping on each other's toes because like there aren't that many projects going on in her company, so like I think it'd be weird.
Fair. Oh yeah, like they all have their different vibe, right? Like it's not always a good fit.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it's not a bad thing to have a couple hours away, right?
Yeah, I mean it's fine that we don't need to see each other all the time. We already live together. We don't need to kind of spend the extra 8 or so hours together.
Yeah. Nice. And do you think eventually you'll transition away from that if you can get into more of the astrophysics, or?
Definitely, yes. I don't see myself doing finance my whole life. I'd definitely like to do research in astrophysics. So the goal is that next 2 years I would be doing my master's part-time.
Okay.
And then if that works out, then I'm going to try to apply for PhDs full-time and then hopefully get funded for a PhD.
That'd be cool. Yeah. I don't know if are you prepared to like leave London to do it?
Yeah.
Okay. Well then, yeah, you should be all right.
Like, yeah, I'd love to go back to Oxford, but obviously that's not the easiest place to get into.
Fair.
But I had a really nice time for the 1 year I was in Oxford. It was a really nice time. I think the experience is very different when you're a graduate from being an undergrad, because undergrads are mostly like in a vast majority British and upper class, and tend to be a lot more right wing.
Yeah, whereas, that all scans.
Yeah, it was about 80% of postgrads, so masters and PhDs, are international.
That makes sense.
And so it's a lot more diverse. It's a lot more left wing. And I was in a college that was exclusively postgrads, so exclusively kind of older people.
Yeah.
So it was really chill, and it was, like there were parents with kids. It was a very different vibe from like undergrad chugging beer type of thing. Yeah.
That's kind of the experience I had. Like undergrad is this sea of young kids that don't know what else to do with their life, and then postgrad is all these old bastards that have a pretty good idea why they're there. It's a good time.
Yeah. And a lot of postgrads are also kind of working or things like that, or trying to scramble for money because like the parents may have funded the bachelor, but then they're like, well, now you're on your own.
Yeah.
So kind of a lot more down to earth and be like, no, I need to work for this degree. It's
Yeah.
expensive.
But that's the other part, right? Like, because you're working for it, because you're funding it, you take it seriously. Whereas a lot of especially the undergrad, like the kids that get it financed, maybe they don't care that much, right? like that was kind of the frustrating bit for me, like, because I had to pay for all of mine and I worked for all of mine, and I just ran out of money because I got hit up by a pyramid scheme that was running through the university.
Oh, no.
And because at that point I was doing that part of my degree in Alberta, and Alberta is like Canada's Texas, so there's no social structure or anything like that. So I was homeless twice. I would not recommend. But yeah,
Wow.
oh yeah, Canada. We like to pretend that we're like a real socialisty country. No. We're just better than the Americans.
Yeah.
But compared to like Europe, no. It's still Wild Westy, like, you know, extractive style capitalism out here. But
Yeah, well, you just have healthcare, basically. You're the US with healthcare. Because you have a lot of guns as well.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Per capita, about the same. The only difference is
Switzerland, I think. Switzerland has a lot of guns, but otherwise in Europe, people don't have a lot of guns.
Yeah, but yeah, we just don't shoot each other with them. Right? Like,
yeah.
That's
the
big
thing
difference.
with the Swiss... Sorry.
No.
You were saying?
Okay. I just the big difference between us and the Americans is like we have just as many guns, we just don't shoot each other. And I think the Swiss have the same thing going. Like, as far as I know, a lot of theirs has to do with their military service program. So like, because everybody does compulsory military service, you know, everybody's pretty comfortable with guns. But again, they don't have a really high gun crime rate.
No, so I was going to say it's also because they don't, you keep the gun, but you don't keep the ammunition. And it's really hard to buy ammunition. So they have the guns, but they don't have the ammunition.
So like some guy from the reserves just issues you a bunch if you need it, kind of thing?
So you're allowed to keep the gun that you had while you were in the military training, but you have to give back the ammunition.
Okay, but they issue it if they want you to have it.
Yeah, you can. So it's I think it's the person that was doing the military service that decides whether they want to keep it or not. No, you may have to buy it. I'm not sure. But yeah, it's the gun you had during military training, and then you can just keep it, but you don't keep the ammunition.
Yeah. But if they want you to have the ammunition, they bring it to you, kind of thing.
Yes.
Got it. Okay.
That makes sense. I don't think anybody's gonna invade Switzerland anytime soon. Like that's been a bad idea in the past.
Yeah. They didn't guarantee neutrality by being super nice. They guarantee neutrality by being really scary.
Yeah.
It works. We have the other approach, like Canada kind of plays the Russia card, where it's like, I mean, you could invade, but why? It's gonna take you so long. Oh man.
Yeah.
Actually, for funsies, I did the math last night when I was talking to Kate, and like from Scotland to the east coast of the US is almost the same distance as the east coast of the US to the west coast of Canada. This place is big.
Yeah, and it goes far north as well, because like I don't know what's the distance like in terms of. I mean, once you've invaded the few kind of first 100 kilometers in the south, you're probably getting most of the people. But if you want to get all the polar bears,
good luck. But that's the thing. Like in Canada, like 90% of the population is within 25 miles of the U.S. border. So once you've got that, you're pretty much aces. Like our population's really concentrated in a handful of a handful of cities. And then the rest of the country is like one person every 100 square K. Like it's a very different setup out here. But that's part of what makes it like a really unattractive target for invasion. Because if you do hit us, so many of us like hunt and camp and do all that kind of stuff. So we just disappear into the woods. It's like, are you really going to go after them? Like the province that I live in, BC, is bigger than the entirety of Great Britain. So like, good luck.
Yeah, and also, I mean, there was a thing like, I think New Jersey originally was given to the Prince of Jersey or something, but it's like, I don't know how many times the size of Jersey.
Yeah.
It's like, you have this tiny island, so we're going to give you this massive chunk of land on the other side of the ocean.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but like, they didn't. The way land was done out here was really, it wasn't really planned. So it got really weird really often. Like Canada specifically, like at one point, 85% of the country was just part of the Hudson's Bay Company. Like a British crown company just controlled the country because like it's it gets weird. It gets real weird.
Well, I think it was the case for the southern US as well. Originally,
Yeah.
like Jamestown and stuff was a company, was
Yeah,
owned
yeah,
by
it was the
a
Virginia
British
company.
company.
Yeah. Yeah, the original 13 colonies, that was all Virginia company stuff. And then the South was its own enterprise. And the South gets really screwy because you had like Spanish colonies, French colonies, and English colonies all at once. So they got even weirder because all three of those models had different legal frameworks and different understandings of land ownership and things like that. And then it quickly developed into dealing with all of those crowns as well as the local situation, because like they completely ignored the natives, but the Mexican government and things like that like started to swing pretty hard. Like the Mexican government.
Yeah, the Spanish had a really weird thing with like very specific classification of how much non-white blood you had.
Oh yeah. It was.
It goes into details. It's like really weird.
Yeah. It's a very tight like racial hierarchy. It's
yeah.
It gets real gross real fast. But a lot of the Mexican government took on some of that, but there was a point when Mexico had a bigger economy than Spain did, so that kind of pushed that revolutionary zeal on them. And yeah, it's once they became a big player in the field, then all of a sudden what the French were doing and what the English were doing had to change pace, right? You couldn't just be a little company out here and deal with an actual aggressive country, right? It wouldn't work. I mean, the main thing that held Mexico back was the natives, because like in the East Coast, they kind of got wiped out between plague and intentional genocide type stuff, whereas in the Central and the South, like with the Comanches, with the Apaches, with the Arapaho, like you couldn't get away with that stuff. Like you're going off into the desert where these guys know the land and are ready to fight you for it. Like, it did not go well for them.
I think the French also, from what I learned at least in history, is that the French didn't exterminate natives as much, and that's why when there was the 7 Years' War between France and England, most in the US, most of the natives actually sided with the French.
Yeah. That was actually a big thing in the relationship between Canada and the US, because the same thing happened during the Revolutionary War, and the same thing happened during the War of 1812, where the natives tended to side with Canada and gave us a fighting edge. So we won most of those wars, which we will never let the Americans forget. But yeah, like the French approach was much more like they didn't have the same interest in colonizing out here. Like it was a different thing in Haiti and in other parts of the Caribbean and things like that. And then their possessions in Africa and South America. In North America, they didn't really go in originally with the intent of settling, right? They mostly just set up trading posts and then built local connections with the native bands, because that was seen as the better way to go. And in a lot of ways, it worked a lot better. And for the original, like for the initial part of the colonial enterprise in Canada, at least, the French were a lot more successful because of that than the British or than the Dutch. The only thing that really swung that is once the English got, like once the British stuff got more established, they could just kind of force the French out of their position because they outnumbered them, 200-1. And the British system was very much like divide and conquer. So like there's if you track the history of it, what they would do is they would come in and find out who's the local chief having trouble with. So they would come in out here on the East Coast. There was a group called the Beotux that had a pretty good established system with the French. They were a pretty, valuable trade partner for the French trading companies out there. The British didn't like that. So it's like, okay, so who has problems with the Beotux? Oh, the Huron don't like the Beotux. Okay, let's say we give you guys a whole bunch of guns. Will you take care of that Beotux problem for us? No, like, yeah, absolutely. We'll give you the land. It's fine. Yeah. So the British shipped them a bunch of weapons. The Beotux got wiped out. And then the British turned around to the Iroquois and went like, hey, have you noticed the Huron are getting awfully powerful, really uppity, taking a lot of land. We can't have that now, can we? So then they give a whole bunch of guns to the Iroquois to wipe them out. And it's like, okay, this is a practiced game at this point. But that was kind of like the way things were done. It's the same thing that went on in India. Like you can't take over a subcontinent with 200 dudes on a boat, right? But you can convince the locals to fight each other for you, and then just swoop in at the end. It's a very effective tactic. It's cruel, but it works. And yeah, because the French system out here was not, it never had the population base. It never had the strength to resist something like that. Eventually just got forced out. And then
Napoleon I think sold Mississippi in the end, because they were like, we're not going to ship like thousands and thousands of men. That's going to cost a huge amount, and we're not even sure to win in the end. So let's try to make a buck out of it.
Yeah, in Napoleon's case, it makes a lot of sense because of what was going on the continent, right? Like he couldn't. There's no way you can split your army and ship half of it to North America. It's not worth it, especially since like Haiti was making them more money than like the entirety of the Mississippi program. So like, what's it worth? Whereas like with the Mississippi purchase, like with the Louisiana purchase, they controlled like a third of the American, like the current American territory, and
the middle basically. Along the Mississippi River. Yeah,
but the only thing that was really valuable to them was Louisiana, was like New Orleans. Everything else was basically just like trading territory. Like we get the tariffs in here, but realistically, there was a handful of fur traders, and everything else was native communities.
Yeah.
Until the British started to try and take it. Because they never they didn't do that settlement thing. They didn't have a good reason. Whereas in Britain, like a lot of what initially populated the English-speaking parts of Canada was like deportations. It was I can't remember the term for it off the top of my head, but the transit, is the same thing they did with Australia, right? Like they would come up with reasons to throw you on a prison ship and ship you out because we can't have too many poor people in England all at the same time because otherwise they're going to like rise up and kill us. Look what happened to the French. We can't have that. So we're going to put them on boats and we're going to ship them out. Solve that problem right there.
The thing also is that the French had their demographic transition earlier than the British.
Yes.
So when colonization started, the French did not have too many people in the country because the demographic transition was over. Yeah. Whereas the Brits were right in the middle of that demographic transition.
Yeah.
And therefore we're having a overpopulation problem. And their solution to it was, well,
ship
these lads over there, let's just send those poor people. They'll find something to do. Was the French didn't really have that incentive. And France is still, because France has about the same population as the UK, but it's significantly bigger. So France is still a lot less populated than, in terms of concentration, than a lot of countries in Europe. Because France is actually, if you don't count Russia, to like Turkey, France is the biggest country in Europe.
Yeah.
And it isn't like Germany has more population. The UK is slightly more, but about the same. So
Italy and Poland are pretty close, right?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know exactly all the numbers, but France has this massive thing that we call La Diagonale du Vide in the middle. So basically from the northeast to the southwest, there is this big chunk in the center where there's just nobody. I mean, not completely nobody, but it's sheep, and there's like mountains in the middle as well, but there aren't many people there.
Okay.
And you get a lot of people like on the kind of northeast, around kind of where the coal was, basically, in the Rhine Valley.
Right.
Where there is kind of a bit of an industrial region with Germany, which is kind of getting pretty poor now, but
the Alsace-Lorraine, let's chuck it back and forth thing.
Then there's obviously Paris, which is very crowded. The city itself is very crowded. It's a lot. It's more people than London, and in a much smaller, much smaller area.
Brutal.
So Paris is very crowded. And then otherwise you get people kind of along the coasts because that's where trading posts were historically. But there's this big chunk in the center where this is just very empty.
Well, and you think about like what was going on at the time, like the thing that gave Napoleon such an edge was this arming of the populace, was this massive like mobilization of population. So reducing your population voluntarily wouldn't really line up with that, right? Like, whereas the English system didn't really take advantage of that the same way. And because they had their weird relationship with the locals, like they had motivation to destabilize and disempower the Welsh, the Scottish, the Irish. So those were the guys they were like shipping off, right? Like, especially when they were doing things like the enclosures up in Scotland and in Ireland. Like, you're going to dispossess a whole bunch of people, and then they're going to get mad. So rather than dealing with that, let's just put them on boats and ship them off to Canada. Like, well, we took all your land in Ireland, but here, well, there's a bunch of land in Canada for you. The fact that it's pointless empty tundra doesn't matter. But you can.
And the fact that you're probably going to die on the ship there doesn't matter either.
Yeah, well, as long as you're dead, we don't really care. I think that solves our problem. But they, the other thing, like the big difference you noticed over here between the Spanish approach and the French and British approach is the Spanish approach wanted like that centralized military authority, and in certain parts of South America that worked. Like when they came in and knocked down the Aztec Empire and kind of assumed that position, the infrastructure was already in place. Same thing with the Inca Empire. But you couldn't do that in northern Mexico because there was no centralized state. There was no state infrastructure. There's no roads. There's none of that. And the Spanish system was very much centralized military authority. Like the state maintains a monopoly on armed force. And once you get up into that less populated part of northern Mexico, that doesn't work anymore because the natives aren't centralized. They're the people that lived out there were very mobile and knew the land really well. So you couldn't adequately defend yourself from that. If you're going to try and expel people, you can't hold that land from those guys. You got no chance. And that was kind of the nature of the beast in North America as well. Like we didn't really have an established like centralized state anywhere. It was much more loose confederations and things like that. But it means that you couldn't just come into a place, take a city, and then control the entire area. So what became a more effective route was arming the civilians, was saying like, it's your land, not the state, not the church. It's your land, and it's your job to protect it.
Yeah.
And that made more money for the British Crown, and they cost them so much less because like the Spanish were trying to maintain an actual like field army in South America, in Mexico. And in the southern centralized part of Mexico, it kind of worked, but once you get up north, no chance. And to try and do that in like Quebec, no chance. It's just too big. It's too big, too spread apart. It's not going to work. Which is actually like a big part of where the American and Canadian like conception of gun ownership and stuff like that comes from. Like that's why they wrote it into their constitution in the States. Like we need you to have guns. Why? Because we need you to protect. We need you to defend this dirt for us from the native guys that we pushed off of it. We need you to defend this dirt from the Canadians. We need you to defend this dirt from the Spanish. And we can't really afford to mobilize an entire state army to do that. So it makes sense. It makes sense how you get there. It's screwy how it develops now, but it makes sense how you get there.
Well, there were a lot of militias because there was also militias for militias were dealing a lot with slavery as well, preventing slaves from running away. That was the role. There wasn't really you wouldn't send the national army if there was slaves that were rioting. You would have local militias because everybody had a gun.
Yeah, well, that's the other part of it, right? Like the
white people had guns, not the black people.
The slave catching industry, like it was volunteer, right? These are guys that volunteered for the gig. They're not like state employees or anything like that. But it was the same thing for sheriffs at the time. It was the same thing for police in general, right? It's just volunteers, which is a little scary. Like that you feel compelled to volunteer to do this. Oh, that tells me a lot. Right? But that's the other part of it, right? Like Canada has a really different history with slavery. So our systems developed really differently because of that.
I've studied American history in school because when I was in high school, so grades, I don't know, do you count the grades the same way as the US do?
I think so for the most part, yeah.
So that would be grade 10 through 12.
Okay.
Yeah. I was in something called international section, US international section. So basically that's something that was created for the children of U.S. immigrants, so mostly kind of ambassadors and things like that, so that they would retain some of the culture and language from their home country.
Yeah, the Americans usually set something like that up everywhere they have a military base.
Well, the thing is that in France we have that not just for US, we have that for English as well. We have that for Spanish, Chinese. Like there's a bunch of different international sections.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. Okay, so it's an intentional.
But it was mostly originally it was just one high school in the suburb of Paris for the ambassadors, where you had like all of these different sections, and then it kind of expanded throughout France as kind of international relations got bigger.
Right.
So there was one in the high school I was in for US, and so that means that we had US history. If you were in that international section, you had US history and US literature, which meant that the degree I had at the end of high school is the equivalent of AP history and AP literature in the US.
Right. Okay. So I imagine like that's an entire program in English and like that whole. Yeah. Okay.
And the teachers have to be natives and things like that. Yeah.
Like from the U.S.
Not necessarily from the U.S. They just have to be native English speakers.
Okay. Yeah. That makes sense. Okay. So then you're pretty acquainted with the whole setup out here.
Yeah. I mean, we did. I didn't do Canadian history too much, but we did U.S. history. Pretty much throughout the U.S. The U.S. history is not that old, so it's 3 years. You have time to cover U.S. history. And then in terms of literature, so the weird thing is that we did have some Shakespeare, because that's something I study also in the US. Yeah. But we also had quite a bit of American literature, like now I'm forgetting. We've had
Great Expectations, To Kill a Mockingbird, Catcher in the Rye. Like they have their standard.
Yeah. What else did we have? We had I forget his name. I really like this play. It's a play. It's in the 50s. The Streetcar Named Desire.
Oh yeah. Okay.
That's the name I was looking for. Sorry, it's not the only thing that we studied, but I really like this one. Yeah. And we also had some kind of compulsory international ones. So we did a Canadian author. We did Cat's Eye from Margaret Atwood.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so we didn't do The Handmaid's Tale, but we did Cat's Eye.
Yeah, it's just as good, right? Yeah, we Canadians never expect like other countries to take us as seriously. Like we know the reality on the ground, right? And of course, if you study a lot of American history, you're going to get a lot of the Canadian stuff secondhand anyway, because a lot of this stuff affects us. Like that's kind of that old joke in Canadian politics, like. We sleep next door to an elephant. It doesn't really matter, like if what they're doing is directed at us or not. We're going to be affected if they roll over, right?
Yeah,
that's kind of the game here.
But yeah, it's quite funny that Margaret Atwood counted as kind of foreign literature, because English literature didn't count as foreign literature. American literature didn't count as foreign literature, obviously. But anything else was counted as foreign literature. So we had to have 12 books in total, and 4 of them had to be foreign literature.
Okay.
Maybe 20 books. Maybe 20 books. I don't remember exactly how many it was. Maybe it was 12 books each year and a total of 24 over 2 years. I don't remember exactly. But yeah, so Margaret Atwood was one of our international authors.
As you do.
My teacher, who was Canadian and teaching us Margaret Atwood, was really proud of that. Was like, hey, she counts us in it as an international author, but she actually writes in English, so it's not a translation. So we don't have to bother with studying how well it's translated.
Yeah. Well, at least you get that. But and that's the thing. Like the Canadian dialect isn't so far off that nobody can understand it anyway. Like it's. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything that was weird in Cat's Eye that I was like, ooh, that must be a Canadianism.
Yeah, like there are Canadianisms. It's just that they're like few and far between. Like, and it depends on what part of the country you're in too, because like Canada's really dialecty, but it's not. The dialects aren't so divergent that it matters that much. Like it's kind of like Australia and things like that, where like they have their own accent, they have their own dialects, and like they can tell each other apart. But like if you're hearing Australian accents, it's hard for somebody from the outside to like, this is New South Wales, this is Queensland, this is like Perth. Like, you know, it's not that easy for us to figure out. And the same thing here, like somebody from Canada, I can tell the difference between somebody from the prairies versus somebody from Ontario versus somebody from the Maritimes, but somebody who isn't from Canada, it's also not the same. And I get really lucky because I'm from BC, so my accent is almost the same as like I have what's called a Cascadian accent, so it's the same as like Oregon, Washington, and Northern California. So like I get really lucky with things like the auto caption feature. Like it has a really easy time figuring out what I'm trying to say. So it's pretty good that way.
The funny thing with the auto caption for me is that every time I say PCR test,
yeah,
it writes PC artist. Because I say PCR test, and then they're like PC artist.
Yeah, my favorite one is
politically correct artist. If you ever see PC artist in my caption, I mean PCR test.
Yeah, my favorite one is neurodivergent because that always shows up in Nerdvergent every time.
Yeah.
Like it's like, come on, man. How is
and not? Autistic shows up as artistic for me.
Yeah. That's always a fun one too. I mean, there is some overlap, but it's not that good. But, yeah, it's fun. But,
yeah, I think it picks up my accent quite well as well. Even if sometimes I go a bit French.
Yeah, but I mean, like you don't have like a thick French accent, so it's like you're pretty safe.
No, I don't speak like this.
Yeah.
I do not have this kind of accent.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then there's Quebec. Those poor
guys. Yeah, it's very different. But the French Quebecois is very different from French.
Yeah, very.
Like we have a hard time understanding each other.
Yeah. No, yeah, it's more different than like us and the Brits. Like it's fascinating to watch because like when I was in the Navy, like we dealt with the French Navy every now and again, and the French Navy guys and our Quebecois guys on the boat, no chance. So you'd have like the Quebecois guy say something to the English guy to translate it for the French guy. Like, what? How did we get here? But yeah, it's a good time.
Yeah. I mean, there was this film, I think it was called Starbucks, that did quite well, and that was a Quebecois film. And originally, they showed it in cinemas in France with subtitles, but then they ended up just doing a French version of it. So they reshot it with different actors, and they just did a French version of it. But the original film was filmed in French, but in Quebecois French.
Yeah. So it's a foreign film at that point, like no chance.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, like that's one of those Canada, right? Like in theory we're bilingual, but the only places that really are places where it's like an asset. So like the part of Ontario that's right up against Quebec, especially like around Ottawa and things like that, French is really popular, and a lot of people are really bilingual. And then in Quebec, if you're in like Montreal, then bilingualism is really common. But outside of that, it's mostly French first. New Brunswick is pretty good from what I gather. Like they're pretty bilingual, but the rest of the country, like no, like barely anybody speaks French.
I think it's the same in Ireland, where they're supposed to learn Irish in school, and they're supposed to do an Irish degree. They're supposed to be good enough in Irish to be able to get into university. Hi, do you have someone off screen that you want to talk to?
Okay. No, it's my wife. I have to go get the baby in a little bit. It started snowing again, and where my mother-in-law lives, it tends to get buried. So we have to go get it. But I got a little bit left. Because I didn't really have a list going in of things I wanted to talk to you. I just kind of wanted to see what would happen. And as I anticipated, the standard neurodivergent, we're just going to go everywhere, which to me is a good sign. I consider that a good sign. But yeah, like I'm sure in the near future, we'll probably get onto the trans rights stuff, because I feel like that's going to be fruitful little garden to peddle it through. Because coming from the ethics side, I feel like we're going to get into some fun stuff there. Then there's the autism stuff. That's also another deep well for us to dig around in. I wouldn't be surprised if you had fun in the anti-capitalist stuff as well. So that's also, fruitful. We'll see if we can get Kate in for that one, because I feel like that's going to be plenty ranty.
My cat is probably going to jump on my lap, because he's been kind of complaining that he's not getting attention. So
desperately staring you down.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you want to like chuck on the list for our next roundabout here?
We could talk about immigration and refugees as well. That's a subject that's quite dear of mine.
Okay, yeah, that'll be a good one. cards on the table for that one, I tend to come from like an anti-state place. So my positions for things like immigration and refugees tend to follow off from that, because like I think if you're going to make arguments against things like immigration and refugees, then you have to make a decent argument for having a state in the first place, or having borders in the first place, which I think is a little harder to do, right?
Yeah.
And it gets really, really screwy with stuff like with the refugee situation, because in some of those cases, like Canada specifically, was part of why they're refugees. So it's like, we really,
I mean, with Afghanistan right now, England has. Oh, there we go. There goes the cat. England has a big role to play, but they're being very reluctant to take anybody in, or to. I mean, my opinion right now is that the UK is voluntarily encouraging human trafficking. Absolutely. Because they're not providing the safe routes for people to be able to leave Afghanistan or other countries. You need to provide them safe routes, and you need to provide them with the ability to go into safe countries when, you know, they've helped the British or they're gay or whatever.
Mm-hmm. People are going to do it regardless, right? So if you try to stonewall it, then you just end up with creating black markets, whether that's with people or with goods, right? Like it's not it's not a surprise, right? Like we've done this game hundreds of times where you ban people or you ban things and then they just find a way in through the cracks, but then at the cost of those people typically, right? And whenever I see a situation... And
also, in the same time, we're funding human traffickers who are probably going to use that money to do terrible things we don't want them to be doing, like funding terrorism, funding illegal arms dealings, etc., funding drug cartels.
Yeah, it makes sense. You force them into the black market, they're going to do black market things, right? But whenever I see a situation like that, part of the questions I start asking is, if this is the result that they're getting, are we sure that's not the goal? Right? Because like when you're dealing with something like that, when you're dealing with like state power like that, I assume the guys writing the laws have a pretty good idea of how it works, right? Like I don't assume they're idiots. So that just means they're doing it for the wrong reasons, right?
Yeah.
Like
well, I think the thing is that it's a very populist thing to be like, oh, I'm anti-immigration.
Yeah.
And so so they're managing to stay in power by playing that card.
Absolutely. Yeah, like it doesn't do the job of helping the people, but it absolutely does the job of giving them that political clout that they're after, right? And of course, like in a power structure like what is going on in the UK, like it doesn't matter how good your intentions are. If you aren't in power, what you care about doesn't matter, right? Like you have to be in power to make those decisions in the first place. So staying in power is priority one. And if you can do that by appealing to like a whole bunch of angry racists, I guess you're going to do that, right? Like,
and like the what's really weird is that currently the UK government is acting surprised that there are more and more people coming on dinghies.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there are fewer and fewer people seeking asylum, and it's like, duh. Yeah. That's not a surprise. That's a consequence of closing the safe route to seek asylum.
Yeah. Yeah. If 5,000 people want to come in the country and you said you're only allowed to bring 500, the other 4,500 coming on the dinghies, right? Like that's how it's going to play out. But yeah, it's never a surprise. So that's why I'm thinking, like, since we've seen this happen so many times, since we've seen this happen over and over and over again, they know that that's what happens when you make these rules. They know that that's what's happening. So then that makes me think that's what they're trying to do, because like, and I think you've pointed out in a couple of your videos, like if what you're trying to do is build like ride anti-immigrant fervor to an election, a good way to do that is if you can get a whole bunch of pictures of people in dinghies, right? Like if you can paint that argument in that light of things like weird ass invasion narratives and great replacement narratives and things like that, you kind of need fodder for that, right? And you can create that, right? You don't need to create the situation necessarily to create the narrative that you need, but the more ammunition you have, the easier it is to do. And
yeah, because it's a lot easier. What I was saying, I think in my video, was that it's a lot easier to demonize people who are coming on dinghies than someone who's like spent 3 years filling a ton of paperwork to be able to get a plane here.
Yeah.
And who's done like 30,000 tons of background check.
Yeah, like that was always my argument when I was dealing with like anti-immigration stuff in the military, is like there's this narrative that people are sending like the worst people they can come up with and throw them on a plane and send them here. I'm like, that's not how immigration works, dude. Like, getting to Canada is hard and expensive. We only get the best, right? Like we get the cream of the crop, and that's who comes here. The guys who are making like the narrative is always like they're using too much social services and stuff like that. The guys that are making use of that are from here, right? And of course, if that's the problem that you have with immigrants, if the problem that you have is that they make use of social services, what the fuck was the point of the social services? Also,
I'm losing you.
Are they doing their best again, maybe? But yeah, that's a deep well we can dig in.
Yeah.
As you can probably guess, I have a lot to say about that. We'll have fun. So yeah, I'm gonna go get my baby. But this was a good time. It's great to meet you. Great to finally get a read on you. And yeah, I absolutely agree that throwing Kate into the mix and barking about capitalism sounds like a great plan.
Wonderful.
Well,
have a nice evening. No, it's fine. Right, go ahead. I'll let you get your baby. I don't want to keep a baby away from her father.
Yeah. She's a definite daddy's girl too. So she never lets me get away with much. Right on.
Have a good afternoon, I suppose.
Bye.
Bye.
See ya.